So, Revelation chapter 14, verses 1 to 5, that's where we'll be this morning. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven, like the roar of many waters, and like the sound of loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps, and they were singing a new song before the throne, and before the four living creatures, and before the elders. No one could learn the song except the 144,000 that had been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been redeemed from mankind as firstfruits for God and the Lamb, and in their mouth no lie was found, for they are blameless. Now it's November 1st. Can you believe it? And can you believe that we're now 8 months into this pandemic? A meme said that the pandemic started when there was a full moon on Friday the 13th, and we strung ahead. They say this weekend we had a full moon on Halloween, and we fell back, and perhaps the world will reset to our factory settings. That was the joke. But it doesn't seem like it's happened. We're still in the pandemic. We still have the uncertainty that we've been living with. But what have we learned? Well, one thing we've learned about we as people is that we're just not made to sit still. Most of us have things that we need to do. There are things that grate against us whenever we feel confined to our homes or our schools or workplaces. We need to express something of who we are. We've learned it's not just healthy just to sit on the couch eating and passively watching screens. We need to do something as well. We need to take action in our world. We all have a thirst to leave our mark in some kind of way. But the question is, how do we do this? How do we show our purpose in life? And how do we determine our purpose? And how we know if our purpose is healthy? Can we say that one purpose is better than the other? Can we say that one person's purpose to be a doctor is better than another person's purpose to be a professional video game player? Now, there's two strategies for finding purpose that most people do. They look inside and they look outside. People try to look inside their souls. They try and dig in deep and they say, what makes me feel good? What kind of person do I think I am? Where are those dreams that I've been suppressing? And that's the plot of a lot of movies today. Look within, dare to dream, and don't let anyone or anything get in your way. Find your purpose by casting off all strictures of family and faith, and find your special self outside of all commitments. This is the looking inside for purpose strategy. The other popular strategy for finding your purpose is looking outside of yourself. What does everyone say is my purpose? What are my peers doing? What do my parents and teachers say? Or even better, what do people assume about my purpose and what the purpose of life is? And then let me conform to their expectations, those assumptions, and then I will achieve my life's purpose along with everyone else. Now, God does not use those strategies. He has a different way, a different strategy for finding our purpose. And his strategy is this: look back to what he has sown in us as our creator, and then also look forward to the day of his harvest. The Bible says we find our purpose by finding God's purpose for us, God's design for our lives, God's plan. And so here in Revelation 14, we see a conflict of these purpose-finding strategies, which is the picture of the end of history, when everything comes down to the very end, kind of like an election. There's a moment of truth coming. The end of history will come, and it comes when God says it will come. And that's the picture that we see here in condensed form in Revelation 14. That God created the beginning of history, and he is the one who brings this history to an end. So we left off in Revelation 13 with the dragon and the beast seemingly having their way with the world, including God's people. Revelation 14, however, begins with a great hero of Revelation, the hero we've been following through the story up to this point, the Lamb that was slain. He comes, as we just read in verse 1. After this time of hopelessness of Revelation 13, John says he looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. And then we hear a description of the music, the voice from heaven, like the roar of many waters, and the harpist playing their harp. So it's probably a different instrument than the harp, a scimitar or some kind, perhaps like a electric guitar, I like to imagine. But this big thunderous noise coming from heaven, a beautiful song that blows everyone away, sung by 144,000. Evil had appeared to dominate the earth, but then came the Lamb with his 144,000 troops. They were ready to conquer the earth with what? Loud singing. Can you imagine? Now, these were the 144,000 from the tribes of Israel that were sealed back in chapter 7. So much of what we read goes back to the earlier chapters, the four living creatures, the throne of heaven. And so we see those pictures combining with what was before this in chapter 13, the dragon, the beast, who seemed to win, that the whole earth was given over to blasphemy and immorality of every kind. But now a deafening song blasts them with unimaginable purity and righteousness. And then verse 4, we see what these 144,000 are, and it's kind of awkward. It says, these are those who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They have been redeemed from the mankind as first fruits for God and the Lamb. In their mouth was no lie, for they are blameless. So we see a picture of men who are completely devoted to following the Lamb. Their virginity symbolizes this devotion. In the Old Testament, soldiers consecrated themselves or made themselves holy for fighting on God's behalf by not having sexual relations. You remember the story of David and Bathsheba and Uriah the Hittite, Bathsheba's husband, and how he refused to lay with his wife when he was away from the front. This is the consecrated warfare. He was showing that he was still with his troops in spirit, if not in the flesh. And this is what God called his soldiers to do, to abstain from sexual intercourse. And so he's saying these are fully committed to the cause of God and his kingdom. And what we're meant to see is not just the literal sense of virginity and what that involves, but the symbolic sense and the contrast between these 144,000 who were marked by the Lamb and those practically the whole rest of the world who were marked by the beast, as we saw in chapter 13. So we see intentionality of purpose of 144,000 versus the majority, those who compromise with the beast, who go along with the crowd, who look outside themselves. What's everybody else doing? What feels right to me? And we see that God's soldiers know their purpose. They know the fight that they're in, and they know how to win it, as we see going forward. And then we see in verse 6 of chapter 14, John continues. He says, I saw another angel flying directly overhead with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation and tribe and language and people. And he said with a loud voice, fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. And worship him who made the heaven and earth, the sea and the springs of water. This is the one last final warning by the angel. And what does he preach? He preaches what John calls the eternal gospel, or an everlasting gospel. It's a curious phrase. It's the only place this phrase is used. So what is the eternal gospel? Fear God and give him glory. Worship him. Why? Because he made the heaven and the earth. The good news of God is an everlasting gospel because it applies in every age. Fear God and give him glory. This is the gospel for the BC and the AD. Before knowing Christ and even after knowing Christ. Fear God and give him glory. Now, as Christians, we rightly proclaim the gospel as we say things like Jesus loves you and Jesus saves you from your sin. But what's interesting here is that we need to also make that connection with God as creator, God as a sustainer who makes our life possible. Because if people don't understand that Jesus and how he's connected to the creator God, that he is the one who created all things, if people don't know that, if they don't know God as creator and judge, they will think Jesus' love and salvation is just a sentimental feel-good add-on to their lives. I don't know if you've had that experience. You say, Jesus loves you. They nod their head and they say, oh, that's cute. Thank you. That's like the Hallmark movie that makes me feel good. But that's not what the gospel is about. It's about the God of the universe, the God who upholds everything. And the only way we can accurately describe the love of Christ is by describing who he actually is, the author of life, the true owner of all that he made, including you. The author has the authority. We see it in the spelling. And that's why the angel's gospel is know your maker, for you're about to meet him. Turn to your creator before it's too late. This creator has come to reclaim all that belongs to him. It has his name on it. That's what it means to be creator. And so this gospel of Jesus Christ is no Hallmark add-on to your semi-charmed middle-class life. This gospel of the creator is your life. You know him, you know life. You don't know him, you have no life. There is a God, this gospel is saying to America. There is a God, and you ain't him. Someone else created you, and your purpose is not found in whatever you feel at the moment. We do not belong to ourselves. God is the potter, and we are the clay. God is the one who owns everything. And our lives are meant to point to someone much bigger than ourselves. Our stories are nested inside a much grander story. The Lamb is the hero, not you and me. In a few weeks, we're going to celebrate Thanksgiving together in our own homes, I assume. But how gauche would it be to not give thanks to God? How vulgar would it be to chow on our turkey and gravy without giving a thought to the one who gives life that we couldn't give ourselves? Yet this is what we do every day. This is what we naturally do when we just look inside ourselves or look outside where else is doing for our purpose. When we deny God, we're denying our true purpose. We're denying what we're made for, how God sustains our very existence. As Paul said, in him, in God, we live and move and have our own being, have our being. Because after all, we're made in God's image. That's how the story begins in Genesis, and this is how the story ends in Revelation. Made in God's image, we're meant to image God. or glorify God. Which means we reflect God's splendor to the rest of the world. That's our job. And our failure at this duty, that's how Paul begins the gospel to the Romans. In Romans chapter 1 and 2, he says, all of us have already seen God in his creation. But instead, we've rejected him because we suppress the truth and we worship created things instead of the true creator because our hearts are sinful. So here in Revelation 14, the angel preaches the eternal gospel to people who are exceedingly rebellious. Like Paul, this angel says we need to start over at the very beginning. Come back to your creator. Find your true purpose. How? By going back to the start. We find our purpose by going back and by going forward to the creator's harvest, knowing that everything will come to an end, whether our physical lives expire or when Jesus comes back as king and judge. So this gospel says that even in our most wicked rebellion, there's still hope if we will fear God and give him glory. Our creator and judge will have mercy upon us and save us. This is the Lamb who's about to take his rightful throne. His name is Jesus. Repent and believe, for salvation even now can be received. Verse 8 continues. Another angel. Angel and messenger is the same word for messenger. It's really interesting in the original language. So the angel is speaking God's message and what God intends to do. Another angel comes, a second followed, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She who made all nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality." And another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and its image and receives a mark on his forehead and on his hand, he also will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger, and he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they will have no rest day or night, these worshipers of the beast and its image, or whoever receives a mark of his name." This is sobering stuff. This is the fall of Babylon. What's that about? This is going back, as I said, this is culmination of all the storylines of all the Bible. And we see going back to Genesis 11, remember the Tower of Babel. And now it's in full bloom as Babylon the Great. The Tower of Babel, remember that project where it began? Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves. What's Revelation 14 saying? The end of the human superiority project will come, and it's coming soon. The party lasts only for so long. When you refuse to give the Creator his due, and we seek to transgress his created limits, torment is what happens. Now, this is not the Creator, God, being a killjoy. After all, he's the one who created sex and wine and everything else that we enjoy. God's creation is good, but God gives good gifts to be enjoyed within his limits for our own good. That's what God's design entails. The torment that we see here is God giving people the consequences of their actions. The torment that we see is mankind going against the grain of his creation. You know how wood has a grain? You want sand with a grain? Now, we rebel. We say, no, I want to go any way I want. And this is God saying, okay, your will be done. You will experience the torment as I give you over to what your passions entail. And that's what we see in our world today. Not the full torment of hell that is explained here, but we see what happens in our world today when society decides it doesn't need a God to determine what's right or wrong. Or what happens when we treat people not creating God's image, but disposable, like plasticware that you throw away. When we use people and throw them away tomorrow, when they're no longer convenient to us, we see what happens. Torment around ourselves, wreckage, human wreckage. We see what happens when we cheat on our families, when we cheat on our employers and our government, when we can't commit to anyone or anything because we're always looking for something better. We experience torment, anxiety, depression. We sow the seeds of mental illness, and we get surprised when mistrust and faithlessness and chaos ensues. Remember when your mom said nothing good happens after midnight? It was a rule of thumb that was mostly right. Likewise, Revelation 14 is a wake-up call for a world gone drunk on its own desires. This is God saying, nothing good happens when you resist the Creator, when you say, I know better. If the purpose you choose comes from your own ideas and your own pride, you'll be at odds with your Creator. And his house always wins. Maybe even Mohegan Sun doesn't always win, but God's house always wins in the end. So make sure your purpose comes from the Creator who made you at your beginning and will be with you at the end. Now, the end of this chapter 14 goes into gruesome detail about the harvest at the end of history. We see the Son of Man as angels taking a sickle to the earth, harvesting the wicked and the redeemed, like wheat and chaff, as Jesus talked about in his parable. The harvest of the earth that grows up together, it will all be brought together. This is what verses 14 to 17 are. We see imagery of grapes, winepress, and blood. Now, I'm not going to read it all for you this morning, but I want to point out that these details and images match much of what we read earlier in the Old Testament when it talks about the day of the Lord, that there's a day coming, a day of salvation, but also a day of judgment for those who rebel against God. Before those verses, however, in verses 12 and 13, we see a particular encouragement for those of us who follow Christ as we face uncertainty in our own day and we face persecution in the days to come. It says in verse 14, verse 12 rather of chapter 14, here is a call for the endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds will follow them. I hope you're encouraged by those words. Blessed, these are beatitudes of Revelation. Blessed are those who exhibit patience, steadfastness, perseverance. These are the things that characterize God's conquering people. Even death cannot deny the beauty and the power of God's faithfulness shown through them. God treasures beautiful souls even more than what is worldly attractive. God rewards them. He sees them. He sees our struggles. And he says, those who bear with him, they won't be saved merely themselves, but even their good works will last into the age to come. Incredible. God saves us, and somehow even the deeds that we do in his name will go on. The good works that we do by the Spirit's enabling. This is the treasure in heaven that Jesus talks about when we are generous with our treasures on earth. When we give to God's kingdom for his glory, we gain a heavenly reward that does not rust or spoil. Now, make no mistake, this is not earning salvation, but this is displaying the work of God of salvation that he's already done. It will glimmer, it will shine in his people as we respond to the free gift of salvation in our gratitude, in the works that we do, in thankfulness to God. Blessed are those who die in the Lord and rest from their labors. This is the blessed life that Jesus speaks of. This is the life that makes the creator and the final judge, that it makes it all worth it. This is the way that the meek inherit the earth. It makes no sense in this world's point of view. This is the way that those who hunger for righteousness will be filled. This is the blessed life, not built upon this world and what it says or what we see inside of us, but the blessed life that's built upon God's purpose, because he knows the beginning from the end. It's what God enables us to do. And as we do what he enables us to do, we leave the results to God, knowing his reward is at the end. How does it work? I don't know exactly, but this is what God promises. So the ending question I have for us this morning is this: what's your strategy for finding purpose? Is it looking inside yourself? Is it looking out at the crowds? Or is it going back to the Creator, the eternal gospel, the one who made all things and will also harvest all things at the end for his glory, for his purposes? Perhaps you haven't thought this way about your own purpose. So if you shoot for nothing, they say you'll hit it every time. Or perhaps you paint a bullseye around your arrow and you pretend that this is a life that you've been aiming for. God says, pretend all you may, but at some point, the house will cash in all your chips. Revelation 14 says that Jesus followers can't coast through our lives without a purpose that looks back and also looks forward. Until we meet our Maker in the end, there is no cruise control. If we aren't careful to live in alignment with the Creator's design for his harvest, we ourselves may be swallowed by the beast, and we may lead others into the beast's belly as well. The Creator made us to be used for him and to serve him as he made us, with all of our abilities and limitations that he gives. He made us for a blessed life that he makes possible, but we must be willing to endure with him as he enables through his strength. When our Creator exercises his right to harvest, may he find us knowing that we are indeed his workmanship, created and persevering to do the works he prepared in advance for us to do. Let us